that kind of becomes amplified throughout the process of development and then subsequent evolution, culminating in the human species. And I think that's very fascinating to me, just from the vantage point of looking at how we have developed from quarks that quarks, Jesus Christ, I don't know why I've glued myself to quarks today. There are many more fundamental particles than solely quarks, so I'm sorry for that, but and fundamental forces as well. But I find it very fascinating that we have developed from that to contemplate on what we're going to wear on a Saturday night, or what type of wine do we like to drink. Like, that is a very interesting development to me.
Yes, it is. And I might have picked a bit of a poorly description when I said that you could argue, because it's not for the sake of argue that I say it. It is more to show the vagueness within the topic, that it is highly dependent on the relative point that you are speaking from, and it's a highly dependent on definition. To me, at least, it's very dependent on the definitions you are speaking from, and the definitions might alter dependent on the setting you're speaking about it. Because if you're speaking about discovering a new conscious species, well, then you might choose a different definition than in other discussions. So that's more the angle that I want to highlight in this.
But I think that's completely. I don't think you've said anything wrong. I think you're completely in your own. You're in full right to establish the view, and I think more people would potentially agree with you than they would with me. However, I apprehend process not as relativistic. I mean, yes, I do apprehend process as relativistic dimensionalities that are measured one against the another. However, I look at it as much more fluid process, where it goes through means of nuancing from faint to amplified. For example, I think a lot of things that have truly made me understand the universe is really art. And what I mean by that is that if you think about the color, like if we take yellow, and cadmium lemon yellow is one of my favorite shades, is that if I dilute it, it's still cadmium yellow, but its intensity varies. So if I were to compare diluted cadmium yellow brushed against the white canvas with the one that it's not, then you would never call the cadmium yellow the one that the pale one. You will call the one that has the strongest color, that represents the pure color within the designated term. However, the other one would have potentially a different name of a nuance. However, both of them, and that's the beauty of it, I think, the both of them exist under the umbrella of the title of cadmium yellow. However, for the sake of differentiation, we have attributed different names to the different shades that emerge or that are materialized as autonomous entities existing within the respective capacity, because in between completely diluted cadmium yellow and it at its full chroma, there is so many shades that have their own respective names.
And which relevancy does this have to this?
So kind of like the fundamental particles for me exhibit this dimension of informational processing that, compared to what we call being alive, is not in the same, doesn't exist in the same capacity, but exists as a diluted shade of the concept that becomes amplified throughout the development and then subsequent evolution, to the point where we have the capacity to discuss this at all.
But aliveness is just, again, a definition.
Just. Is aliveness just?
Yes.
If something is just, why don't we see more of it? If it deserves such a blatant word.
Because the definition that we have placed on it is fairly strict. Does it enrich us by calling a brick house alive? In any way? Does that change anything for our perception of it? Because then then
Oh,
then we
yes.
would add something else to ourselves, because then we wouldn't just be alive, then we would add something else that we would use to segregate us from it. So I do understand this. One can always attribute this to fundamental particles, but if we go as far to say that every fundamental particle is alive, then we have now concluded that everything in the universe is alive. What did we learn in this endeavor?
Yeah, what did we learn in this endeavor?
Well, we definitely know there's life everywhere. So going to Mars looking
But
for life.
let's go back to this piece. So what has happened? How did this piece come about? So I, an alive agent, I am definitely sure that I am alive. I'm speaking and I'm thinking.
There's a lot of counter arguments to this as well, but yes,
Is
let's
it?
go ahead.
Are we going to discuss that? But
No,
what I want to say,
you could be a simulation. You could be all things in between. So,
but
you
they're
have,
none of that is mutually exclusive.
yes, but then you're again alive by a certain sets of definitions and parameters.
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean if this world is simulated and you have one world behind which is organically real, then by their definition of alive, you are not alive. You might have properties that is reminiscent of conscious to those who have made it, but it doesn't mean that you are.
But that's the thing.
But yes, this is a sidetrack. We don't need to jump into this. You are alive, most definitely, and you have created it.
And I have picked up something that I think would be defined as an inanimate object with capacity for transfer or making transfer visible, and have created something where I have time after time stood in front and have been writing. So what have I been writing? I have been inscribing information. I've also created a bit of a video for this series where you see me inscribe something, and I start from lying on the floor, and then I go further and further up, and then at the end of the performance, you kind of see that I've been inscribing the word information.
Was it a conscious choice that you started at the bottom?
In a sense, that's such a funny question. I was about to say evolution started at the bottom. Everything starts at the bottom. But for this girl, I usually start in the middle. I'll tell you a funny story. So I love pancakes, crepe, like the French version. And me and my father used to make that a lot when we needed some bonding time. And when I would roll them up, so I would roll them, like make a tiny roll, and then how do you call them? Like brette.
You bend them or wrap them.
You
yeah.
bend them. You put two and together, so you got kind of like this U sign. So this girl, like normal people, start with the loose ends, right? You start with the out stickers, right? This girl turned around her pancake and ate the middle first. And then I had two separate pieces that I ate separately.
Yeah, I don't think that's... I can see arguments for both of these approaches as well.
It's not that, but you asked me where did I start. I was like, and I actually, it's very funny because most of the artworks I create, I start with painting things in the middle. And then I go... I'm not going to reveal which direction I go. Yeah. But in this instance... I thought that it was very important for me to start at the bottom. And I think...
In other words, conscious thought to you starting where you started.
In this particular instance, it was, yes. But I also think how beautifully and poignantly that kind of really connects to this dimension of evolution, but also to this, to something so inherently human as well. You know, when you come to a big city and you want to work, for example, me becoming an art, well, not me becoming, I am an artist, but me attempting to place my works within significant dimensions. You start at the bottom, don't you? You start laying down and then you slowly get up. And if I think that also already on its own points toward something quite spectacular on its own. But what do you have? You say that the canvas has soul, and if it has its soul, then it has to be. I know this is figuratively speaking, but art has soul. Art is alive. It has a capacity. Well, we can discuss that. Don't worry, we're here. We're fine. I mean, you can just look forward to the next piece. We're going to discuss free will. But let's go back for a second to this particular thing. Like, I'm not sure how many of you have noticed the particular choice of color is not. It's a conscious choice. And the lobster is also a consciously chosen emblem or a sign, signifier of something. Trace. So within this dimension, this piece exists as an extension where I have transferred my movement, my thoughts, how hard I'm pushing, how hard I'm pressing to the piece. And all of that is inscribed there. Every single movement, every single breath, every single thing that I exist within is inscribed, or every single experience that I've had while I was creating this piece exists inscribed within this piece. And I find that very fascinating.
I agree with you there, but I also think that so does it on every other piece you have ever created.
So does every piece that any artist has ever created.
Yes, so this is what living is. Living is that transcription all the time. Transcription all the time. However, what I really do like about this is that you have chosen to do it in a linguistical way and symbolic way at the same time, and you have used the word that points it out almost most glaringly that this is actually what is happening. And you didn't just make a tiny piece that you could easily hold in your hand and take on your arm and walk away. You made it this big, where it is transcribed so many times over and over and over again to re-emphasize that all of this information, of lack of better words, is always within there and communicated to you when you are interacting with these. And that's what I think is so fantastic about this, all these dimensions playing together.
That's exactly, because, and we're kind of going back to the thing that I contemplate, like I'm looking at this world and I'm in utter disbelief what kind of mess it is. Again, Virgo with the moon in Capricorn, with the Leo cusp. I mean, you gotta love it. But what I'm trying to say is that this world is an utter mess. And if we look at individual lives, we'll call it a human life. Everybody has their ups and downs, argues, we go to the restaurants, we discuss, you do X, Y, and Z. Human life is inherently quite uniform, although the respective dimensions that pertain to the individual experience are obviously are experienced as unique, inherently unique to the agent that embodies such, that is experiencing such. Essentially, there's nothing unique. You walk, you eat, you chew, you fall in love, you talk, you go to a restaurant, you change your clothes, you shower, people have children, go to school. You know, like essentially, if one thinks about the human life, as diverse as it can be, it's also contained within few concepts. And all of them are centered around the human capacity to expand their own experience towards towards some kind of improvement. And yet we are here. We are drinking microplastic. Half of the world is
In poverty.
in poverty. Half of the world also has, for example, rubbish disposal systems. I'm not going to talk about that, but it's, you know. And we all think that, and this piece is made so glaringly obvious because we all know that in every single moment, what we're doing pertains to a form of information. And yet here we are. And that's where things kind of start becoming interesting, because a lot of my work up to this point has kind of dealt with quite glaring emblems. Not glaring, but quite obvious emblems. And yet, when you kind of start scratching the narrative, one starts to understand that we actually do not understand what's happening and what's going on. And we don't, you say that human beings are conscious and alive, but that only pertains to the states where we actually are. What happens when we zone out? What happens when we sleep? What happens, how can we define consciousness and aliveness when that even those faculties vary greatly amongst the individuals on a geographical and economical and social scale. And that's this dimension of categorization that exists, which inherently pertains to how information is structured on differentiated levels, that becomes a fascinating topic to me.
Yes.
Yes, that's what I had to say, I guess, about
this informative piece.
Well, about this informative piece, because ultimately it exists as a inscription, not solely of what I wanted to create within that moment, but it also acts as a token of all the words, thoughts, dimensions that have kind of occurred within the scope of my existence prior to its existence. So as such, it's not only inscription of information, it also acts as a token, as a summary of a lot of dimensions that I wanted to express. And another obvious point is that I think that by now you have kind of a caught gist that my early work is also highly contingent upon the exchange of signifiers, because information is conveyed through different means. I look at you, you're wearing a blue t-shirt. That to somebody who has dealt with fashion, that speaks something, that has meaning. You're wearing a cap. The form of that cap has special meaning to me. It's not just a cap. So I have visual apprehension of the narrative, but then that apprehension also pertains to every sensorial input that is interpreted through the means of the five senses that exist. But in the context of externalizing the information that I myself have apprehended, I've ended up substituting the visual with the linguistic. Because if you think about it, this piece, if it would to be translated into visual, I mean, it's such a beautiful piece. It's such a beautiful piece because inherently it connects. It's such a gorgeous piece. Because if you think about the blue, what is blue? Like, let's start with the red. Lobsters are red. We know that lobsters are red, or at least the cooked ones. I think the less cooked, those ones that are not cooked are not as red, if I'm not mistaken.
So now we have learned that in Irina's world, lobsters are perceived as cooked.
Yes, unfortunately, I don't think. I think, you know what? I don't think I often think about lobsters before they're cooked. I mean, I don't eat shellfish, but lobsters are red inherently, right? And where do lobsters live? Well, they live in the sea. They live in the water, and even when they come out as red, they are cooked in the water. Okay, cool. So they're cooked in the water, and water is often represented as blue. So we kind of have this dichotomy between blue and red that also wraps up, that also kind of exists as the natural milieu of the signals, of the symbol that exists as a main motive of this work. But at the same time, it pertains to something, to a binary that I think a lot of us are really well acquainted with. And as such establishes its own ecosystem of the informational processing loop that not solely tells you about something about me, but it also tells you something about you. Because ultimately, every single piece that you experience as an onlooker becomes the mirror of your own thoughts. It becomes a discussion between you and an artist about the things that the artist has said to himself, herself, itself. The artist has said to the self. They mention what the artist wanted to convey. And then you have this dimension where the onlooker has the conversation. So as such, the ecosystem of aliveness, of the informational processing, we spoke about, last time we spoke about the cursing of the
child?
Yes, and the double name. And whether the information can be transferred through such means. Art is not a proof that can happen, but it definitely points out that the extended transfer exists. For example, if enough people incite for a certain, let's simplify this. If you go to a cafe, people want to go to cafes that have a good vibe. Now, how does that good vibe come about? What is a good vibe? How do you see that? How do you perceive that? How we all know what a good vibe is. I think a lot of people know how a good vibe is established. And yet, I don't think a lot of people think about how they are in their own way contributing to that, because a vibe is also information. It's information contained within a room. And we're going back again to that dimension where this is air, but we're not in air. Like, this is not nothing. It's like amber. It's like ether. You move. It's like going back to my microscope and my small microbes moving, like my cells moving. Like, they move within external space that is also affected by that movement. Yes.
Yes?
Then the question is, do we know what we're inscribing?
Well, that's the question people are left with, aren't they? It's the are you conscious and are you aware of what you are transcribing?
Are we? Because I can actually kind of think that that's the most fascinating dimension of human existence. Because if you kind of look at the movies, we know what's at. All of us know what's at, and all of us know how things should be and how they can be. And this is not should in a preaching way. I think what I wanted to say should be is that it's completely within our capacity to stop using plastic. It's completely within our capacity to stop violence. It's completely within our capacity to stop the nastiness that is a residue of our ancestral.
But is it though? If it is, wouldn't we already have done so?
Yeah, why don't we do that? Why do we constantly project that we know better while we do something else?
Yeah, but then you come back to, could we really? Is it in our power to just stop it?
Isn't it? If we know better,
Well,
isn't it?
knowing and executing seems fairly. There's a lot of people that knows that stealing is wrong, but they're still doing it. Because their situation, because there's a lot more to it than just their ethics. There's a lot more to their surroundings and everything around them. Like, if your life is in danger, and you need to make a tiny breach at something, that tiny breach is easy to argue for, which is an extreme example, because most of the things you're speaking of isn't of that variety. However, as long as the person in power that have reached such a position that they are able to, that their bubble has a bigger impact and ability to form the local area around them, or even the bigger, even the larger global area around them, might be functioning under a different connection and have different coding that makes their decision become different to what we are originally thinking, which might lead to these things. But they might also make the same scenario as for the person who stole an apple because he needed food. They might make that same scenario in a much grander scale for why they might need to make their business a 500 billion business compared to a 250.
Yes, but that's exactly that. And through this dimension, I mean, we are at the point no return. I think that's the most fascinating thing for me, that we have deliberately said over and over again that atrocities, that the residual animal self comes forth, are much more important than all the knowledge that evolutionary process has bestowed upon us. That's fascinating to me. Again, working in the fashion industry has been a very fascinating the existence, because of the sheer accumulation and lacking means of circularity that allows for improvement of the world. And like, you incessantly see how a machinery perpetuates itself to the detriment, to the overall detriment, and yet we constantly allow it. Like, and this is not about shaming or preaching in that sense. What I'm trying to say is that I love clothes. Like, I absolutely love cute outfits. Oh my god, Etsy, yes please. And I constantly keep keep reminding myself that I have to refrain myself from such a behavior, which I do as well to a certain extent. To resist buying things, because I know that I don't need it, and will it make me more happy at in the particular moment? Yes, but the fact that I know how the disposal works, I see so overcrowded bins everywhere. It puts a very unpleasant feeling, but it's also that feeling that makes me aware of this dichotomy existing. And I often wonder, how would it be to be able to go out in the big city and not smell the dust and not smell the petrol? How would it be that one doesn't have to constantly fight for clean water? Like, I'm very fascinated about what's going to happen with how we're going to deal with this dimension of microplastic, because that's going to be, and whether it becomes like again a social and economical issue, where those that have those that have ability to build I was about to say water refineries, but there is a better word for that.
Filtration systems.
Yes, filtration systems. How will that impact the humanity and development of species? Will we, going back also to the food, will we branch? I mean, we are already branching, but I think this particular division can be a very interesting one in 200 years time to a millennia. And then the fact that we have done that consciously becomes a very fascinating topic to me.
Yes, I can see that.
Yeah, because the question becomes, we all know that we exist within this dimension of informational processing, but do we know what type of information we're inscribing? Do we know the granularity that exists within? This piece, for example, I also enjoy that this piece exists within the dimension of different sizes, the font being different sizes. That's also a tell of something.
It's different expressions. I think you are highlighting a lot of interesting thoughts and a lot of interesting angles on things, but I almost think that some of the topics are too big to tackle in this episode and might deserve a future episode of their own.
Oh, I mean, of course, definitely.
Because I have things to say to them, but they're not something that can be said without adding another 60 minutes to the episode.
All right, people. But then we will leave you for the time being. I hope that we have incited some interesting thoughts for you. I hope that during my process, I've become a bit of a green warrior. And I'm not particularly apologetic for the push that I am providing in the narrative that you're listening to. But I do hope that this episode will leave you a bit more with a residue that will make you kind of think twice or thrice before one slices the time.
All right. And with that,
yes,
we'll end on that.
Thank you for listening. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.